newspapermen meet such interesting people. They know the lowdown, now it can be told. I'll tell you quite reliably off the record about some charming people.
Media Project is a half hour of commentary and analysis, and on our best days, some insight into news media issues of the week, and we thank you for joining us. I'm Rex Smith, here with Alan Chartuck, Barbara Lombardo, and Judy Patrick. We are your veteran journalists offering some analysis this week. And, you know, I think one of the things that we ought to start with is the recognition that there's some terrific reporting going on, notwithstanding the demise of the media that we often talk about, the financial perils that are confronting the media. I was listening to this terrific NPR series on incarceration on Indian reservations, which is quite remarkable reporting. And another one that I want to talk about, and Alan, I want to get your take on this first, is ProPublica, the not-for-profit newsroom that does some terrific reporting, has won a number of Pulitzer Prizes since it was founded 10 years ago. ProPublica has done a big story showing that the 25 wealthiest Americans saw their worth rise a collective $401 billion from 2014 to 2018, and they paid a true tax rate of only 3.4%. Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. Do you have any problem with that kind of reporting being done? You think that's a good idea?
I think it's a great idea. I think the whole premise of democracy, of course, Rex, is that people have to know how good services, rewards are being distributed in their country. And if they know that, they can vote appropriately or they can act appropriately. So I think that the news media becomes a terrific transmission belt that allows us as citizens to be able to take appropriate action based on what we're learning.
Judy Patrick, you've been a newspaper editor for many years, now vice president of the New York Press Association. Here's what I want to know about this. IRS data is confidential. Our tax returns are not supposed to be public. So would that cause you any concern if this came to your desk as an editor and you said, here's this story and we're revealing confidential information?
That is true. It is illegal for someone at the IRS to release these tax returns. If you remember, for a very long time, we were not able to access former President Trump's tax returns. So in this case, it is not illegal at all for ProPublica to take the information that it received somehow anonymously. They don't know where the source was, and publish them. And they did this. It shows how a reputable news organization can handle the release of this kind of information appropriately. They took the information and then they made a comprehensive story about tax rate policy, and they were selective. They were judicious. They didn't just publish everything. I mean, maybe they have the Social Security numbers. Maybe they have who these people donated money to. People at ProPublica say there are many more stories yet to come from this. But again, it shows the news media just doesn't take information and publish it. They look at it carefully and they decide what might be harmful and what might not be. It's tough. It's a difficult thing to do, but that's what they historically have done, especially with reputable news organizations.
Now, Barbara Lombardo, so I'll see if I can provoke this out of you. You're teaching journalism now at UAlbany, longtime newspaper editor, executive editor at the Saratogian and the Troy Record. But think about this. How is this not just the juicy gossip about lifestyles of the rich and famous? If you had this on local, like say prominent local citizens in your communities, would you have published a similar story?
I think it depends on what the story is. So you take the information, surely. You also need to make a diligent effort to corroborate the information. You can't assume that this is correct. And I know ProPublica did try to do that with the people whose taxes were released. So locally, it depends on, is it news? Just because you have the information doesn't necessarily make it news. So it depends. If it's something about someone who is against raising the minimum wage and they say my business can't afford to stay in business if we have to give people a living wage or increase their salaries, and then you find out that they're paying 3% of their income, or that their company is paying, very little. I think this is how you get the public informed, and we become a catalyst for positive change by letting people know what's going on. People can relate to this. They're not arcane topics with gigantic numbers just in the billions and millions. When you start talking about 3%, and you know that you're paying your fair share, you're paying 20 or 30% of your income, why aren't these people?
And yet, there does seem to be something that's, I think Rex was hinting at it, vaguely or not so vaguely disturbing about a crook comes along, they steal something. Okay, in other words, this is stolen. And now they hand it to you. And you're supposed to say, well, You're the crook. I'm not. I'm taking this material and I'm going to use it. That doesn't seem right to me.
Well, the IRS is now investigating. The Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service says that there is an investigation of how ProPublica was able to obtain it. And so you get to this ironic situation where the social good of exposing injustice, what seems to be legal injustice in the tax system, is there, but the person who made that possible by leaking it could well be prosecuted. That is something. I mean, isn't there some moral question about us taking advantage of it as journalists, but those who make this possible for us are the ones who will pay the penalty?
I don't know. Rex, it's interesting because it all depends on whose ox is being gored here. I'm fairly well known in our little area that we cover here. And, somebody takes my tax information and distributes it. Not that I have anything to worry about, but if somebody does that, I might be annoyed, and so might everybody else who's sitting at this table, even though, as we all said, we all pay our 30% or whatever we pay. So it seems to me that if you have laws and journalists skirt those laws, it's not nice.
The journalists aren't skirting the laws, though, and the ox isn't being gored. The ox is being embarrassed. I mean, it's one thing to investigate a leak that imperils the national security or threatens to put someone in danger. It's another thing to embarrass. Jeff Bezos is going to go into space. And so now we know that he doesn't pay any taxes. He may be a little embarrassed. He probably is not embarrassed. And just like Donald Trump, he was pretty proud of the fact that he didn't pay any income taxes.
Right. And he was smart.
Yeah, and it was a smart thing to do. I mean, it's not illegal for a newspaper or any media organization to publish this kind of information. It's illegal for them to obtain it illegally, for them to tap into a computer system or to steal it. But if someone else has done it and hands it to them, they're fine to go with it. Many Supreme Court cases have decided in favor of media organizations. Think of the Pentagon Papers 50 years ago.
Sure.
This year, Pentagon Papers, same thing. It's important. There are a lot of things the government doesn't want us to know that they classify and they say it's illegal for us to know. Well, time after time after time, we get that information and we realize we should have known that. The public should have known.
Well, let's make it legal to know it. In other words, you say somebody steals it and they put it out there, that's okay. No, that's breaking a law. And the media, which, I have nothing but respect for it. I want to know how much taxes Donald Trump pays. But do we have a two-class system here in which the Judy Patricks of the world are allowed to thumb their noses at the rules and the law and work around it and say, well, I'm justified because I'm the press?
We don't have a two-class system. We do have a First Amendment, and that is the reason that
you can break the law.
I'm not breaking the law when I publish that information. The Supreme Court has ruled I am not breaking the law.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're also saying that the people who we're reporting on in these stories are also not breaking the law, that what they've done is legal. And so whether the material was obtained initially improperly or illegally, we have a responsibility to use it in a responsible way and also to protect that source.
Now, what about the investigations then that are now being revealed? That the Trump administration in particular had a record number of investigations and prosecutions of people for leaking. And we have only recently found out that there was even a gag order on the New York Times and on CNN to not let anybody know in the public, even for the lawyers for those organizations, not to let the executives or the editors of those organizations know that the phone records of reporters had been seized, that the government was secretly going after the phone records of journalists to find out who had been leaking this information to them. Dr. Shartok, any problem with that?
No, I have no problem with it. I think it's fine. But I am very interested in the idea that you people, as I often call you, the three of you are, newspaper people, think anything that you guys do is justified. And, others are not allowed to skirt the laws, if not break them. You say, well, it's not really breaking the laws, and this has been reviewed. And by the way, it isn't only Trump who's done this. Obama wasn't happy with the leaks in his administration, and I think that's been forever.
Richard Nixon wiretapped reporters' phones, the Bush administration.
Yeah, I'm a big friend of Richard Nixon's. Cut it out.
Yeah, well, I mean, they all did it. So you're saying you have no problem with this?
I say I have no problem with the people getting the information.
Oh, no, I'm asking how you feel about that. You just said, the question I asked was if you have a problem with the government seizing the reporters' records.
Oh, yes, I have a big problem with that.
You do?
Yeah, because I know what they're up to. I don't like it, but for the sake of this program being an honest and good forum, I try to raise all of the issues.
Okay. You're taking a breath, Judy. You're about to say something.
So I was outraged when I first heard that. Again, I understand that previous administrations have gone after reporters' emails and who they're talking to. I was outraged when I first learned about this seizure of CNN information, Washington Post information, New York Times, and then doubly outraged because I find out that they have been under a gag order. The lawyer has not even been able to tell the reporters or the editors that the Justice Department is doing this. Let's be clear, the average person doesn't understand why this is so important. It's important because, again, there are things the government does not want us to know, and the only way we find out is through these leaks. And even though people can go to jail, and people have gone to jail for leaking information to the press, what this does, it scares everyone who might potentially be releasing information, important information like Daniel Ellsberg did in the Pentagon Papers. Maybe now he won't do it because he's worried about, reporters' phones being tapped. Well, they're not tapped. They got the logs of who they called, so they know who the reporter is. They even at some point reached out to see what calls were being placed from nearby phone booths. So this trying to track down leakers, I understand it, but I think they've gone way too far in these cases.
So let me ask you a question, Judy, since you're so bright and, you're so...
Yeah.
Let's just assume that you were the president or the editor of a major metropolitan newspaper, which of course you are, and you find out that somebody is leaking your most intimate information wherever you are.
Intimate information?
Yeah.
Well, that's a different matter from leaking government policy information.
Yes,
Right.
it is.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
But in terms of you're not wanting everybody to know your business, as we say, do you think that you would be in a different position than the people you're now criticizing?
Because it was a private company, certainly. But the government is the public. It's we the people. Let's not forget that the public has a right to know, and democracy can only function if the public knows the information they need to know.
We agree on that, except that Rex is always using that silly line about it's a private company, therefore we can do anything we want within the law, as opposed to if it's a government. And so there you are, too, Judy, lining up with him in your usual way.
Oh, man. I understand. I think we all can understand the government's concern that there are certain things that probably should remain classified. Maybe I'm being naive and trusting about the government. There's probably things that should not be leaked. However, the way to go after those leaks need to be internal within their department, not going after the reporters' information.
So the good news is that the Biden administration has changed this. It seemed almost like an off-the-cuff comment by the president, but the Biden administration backed up and said they will change the Justice Department policy that allowed prosecutors to tap reporters' phones and root out leakers. This is not going to happen anymore, according to President Biden. And this happens after one of the New York Times reporters who was tapped, Adam Goldman, said this about the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia, quote, "They have a history of treating the media like drug gangs, seeking process to get phone logs in emails to root out information. It's preposterous." So treating journalists like drug gangs supposedly is not going to happen anymore.
Well, at least while Joe Biden is president.
Yes.
Well, that's why we need some federal legislation to change this, because Joe Biden's not going to be president forever. And the next person may reverse the policy once again and may even be more aggressive in going after what the reporters are doing.
Absolutely true. The reason why this is important is it's really an affront to the First Amendment. This is really, we have freedom of speech in this country, but that freedom is restricted if you feel as though the government's going to come looking over your shoulder when you're talking to someone about something that's going on inside the government.
Talking to someone who may be breaking the law, Rex?
Talking to someone who may be, Here's actually one of the other elements of this, though, that we really don't bring out, that even Hillary Clinton, when she was being investigated for the email server, one of the many partisan investigations of Hillary Clinton, she made the point that we overclassify in this country. Stuff just gets rubber-stamped classified, whether it really needs to be or not, and that is an attempt, again, to stop the embarrassment of public officials. And it's our job as journalists to try to root it out. You know, when I was the editor of the Times-Union, I worked with this great investigative reporter, Brendan Lyons, who's now a managing editor there. Brendan used to actually have his sources call him. He would call them from a house phone at a hotel near our office and ask people to call him on a pay phone booth that he knew of near this radio studio, so that even if their phones were being tracked by the governor's people, they wouldn't be able to find out that he was calling the Times-Union. So even in the state of New York, even aside from Washington, this kind of stuff goes on. Investigative reporters know that they have to protect their best sources. So that's just interesting technique.
Protect sources who are breaking the law.
I mean, breaking the law, Alan, you sound like Donald Trump, you know.
So you see this,
it's all good. Let's just, you can't break the law.
Well, come on now.
What about civil
Come on, cut it out. This is the media project.
Yeah.
If you think I believe everything I'm saying, you'd be wrong. I'm just trying to stop this gaggle of, anything's justified as long as we're journalists.
Well, there are a lot of people out there who actually believe that, who think that people who leak information, who think Daniel Ellsberg should have gone to jail, they're of that mindset, and they don't understand why we do what we do and why that information, again, often shouldn't have been classified, shouldn't be secret. Like, there was a time in our history when tax returns were readily disclosed. We all know how much everybody pays in property taxes. There's a lot of good to be done for having information available to the public. Listen, we publish the salaries of public officials.
So change the law.
Change the law.
Yeah. And by the way, if anybody wants to hear my conversation with Daniel Ellsberg, just go to WAMC.org and look it up, and you can listen to that hour.
Aha. Very cool. When was that done?
1831.
Okay, very good. This is the Media Project. That's Alan Shartuck, Judy Patrick, Barbara Lombardo, and Rex Smith. We are here with you every week. And if you want to have your views shared, media@wamc.org is how you can share your thoughts. Most people get their news from television, and Fox News, folks, is back as the #1 cable channel after having fallen off in the aftermath. There's an interesting article. It comes from a book that was written by Brian Stelter of CNN called Hoax, Donald Trump, Fox News, and the Dangerous Distortion of Truth. That book talks about the post-election changes at Fox. This is recent history now, and how Fox News has become more partisan, more opinionated, less about news, more about trying to reach the far right. A producer said to Brian Stelter, quote, "We turned so far right, we went crazy." And I guess the question I want to ask this group is, what can be done when the most popular cable channel is devolving into a purely opinion-driven, hard right, even further departing from what is actual news? Is there anything you think that we can do about this? Because after all, this is driven by market forces. This is just what happens when the audience goes that way.
That's absolutely right, Rex. There is nothing that can be done, because if there is something that can be done to them, it can be done to everybody else, in media. And so what is particularly...
Sorry, that rings when Alan makes a particularly cogent comment.
So Fox knows full well that this is where the money lies, and they're going to go there. And if there are enough Americans, and apparently there are, because there are 74 million of them who voted for Trump, who will say, okay, this is my network. It reinforces everything I have to say about the way that things are going in this country. And I don't see what you can do except call them out for it. Now, I have to be honest with you. There's a whole new movement in television journalism that we hadn't seen 10 years ago, in which if there's something particularly reprehensible, CNN will put it on with Fox logo right underneath it, that they said this. And it's a way in which they can hold them somewhat responsible. But other than that, I don't know what you can do. You can sue them if they say something that is particularly wrong or harmful. But I don't see it.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. It's all about the money for them.
Sure.
There's no ethics or integrity involved in this.
And more about the prestige of being the #1 right-wing cable station. They know that if they continue to do this, people will laud them who they need. They don't care about the people who would watch CNN.
Right, they're not
or
really
MSNBC.
reporting news.
Yeah.
They're just reinforcing opinions. And I wish that there would be a cable station that was, maybe this is why I'm not in the business end of things, that would be a more straight news reporting entity so that people who maybe are sick of or want to hear something that's not totally wackadoodle on either side can go to this trusting news source that holds both sides accountable.
Well, do you consider CNN a wackadoodle?
No, but I think that CNN has definitely come out so liberal on positions that it's not a straight and narrow. So I think you have to call out people on both sides. And
well, what it is, I think, is that the primetime hours have become now an exhibition space for opinion rather than straight news reporting. CNN does really great straight news reporting. So do the major networks, the broadcast networks, when there is actual news happening. If a space shuttle explodes or if there is a natural disaster, this is really fine reporting. But when you take the prime hours when someone is watching and you fill it with opinion as though it's as though you've put in print the editorial page on the front page day after day after day. And that becomes what people are known for, and that divides the country. Barack Obama did an interesting interview in recent days with Anderson Cooper, and he said that that the path toward an undemocratic America is happening in a series of steps. And he said the media has an important role to play. And one of the issues Obama says is the nationalization of the media, not the state taking control of private media, but, for example, Sinclair, which owns a lot of local TV stations, leads its local newscast with national stories and requires these local stations in the capital region of New York, that is the CBS affiliate, CBS 6, requires them to carry these national right-wing commentaries. That has an impact, and that is sort of poisoning even the local journalism that people have trusted for years.
Right. You got to love, I've got to love the former President Obama for focusing on the value of local news. There was a study a few months ago out of California comparing two newspapers, and it showed that if the local editorial page focused on local issues, there was far less polarization in the community than if they included a lot of national issues. As you're seeing less and less local news, it does increase the polarization, and that is contributing to the fights at family tables and in the bars and the restaurants over, major geopolitical issues. I really appreciate him noting that that's not the whole solution. You got to have people pay attention to it as well.
And you have to have the local media surviving. We had a story this week about a Texas newspaper that has managed to survive because they have
a coffee shop.
They have a coffee shop.
Oh my God! Some of the listeners might know that when the Saratogian sold its building, or Alden Capital sold the building, and Saratogian moved to office space down the street in the city, that building is now a coffee shop and bar, but privately owned. And, reading that story about Texas, thinking, wouldn't that have been great to keep that going? It's a popular, lively place, and that could provide an alternate source of revenue instead of classified ads.
Right, exactly.
Well, let me take a different view of this. It seems to me there's a problem with this Sinclair story and the way that we're talking about it. Donald Trump is a would-be dictator, a guy who's tried to instill a fascist system in the United States. He is by far the most difficult president that we have ever had when it comes to subverting the democracy. So if that is the case, I see no problem with local news doing what they need to do in order to stop this takeover from happening, this fascist takeover from happening in the United States. So while we may tisk and say they should cover more local news, I think there's a problem with not everybody on board getting involved in this.
Well, I think you have a point, Alan. I hate to say that.
I know you do, Rex.
Well, I'd like to check in a year or two and see how the coffee shop is doing.
Yeah.
I think, I don't want to divert too many resources or attention away from the core business, which is producing news, to run a coffee shop. I understand there was a trend for a while, maybe 10 years ago, to have little coffee bars in the lobbies of newsrooms to encourage people to come in and give us their opinions about this or that, more to engage with the public. But again, I think let's focus on on the core mission too.
But what's the difference if it's turning revenue? If you're Ted Turner, for example, and you used the revenue from your outdoor advertising, it was his billboard company that initially funded CNN when he launched it. It's great to have revenue of one sort or another, whether it be from a kitchen that's serving food to your community or from classified ads, as Barbara says. One of the things that newspapers have considered is you have this network of independent contractors who work for you delivering the paper in the morning. If you're going by all these houses anyway, why don't you just become the delivery service? Why don't you become a local version of FedEx and just do this for your local companies? I think there are some creative ways that you might be able to draw some revenue that you could then plow back into your newsroom.
I like that. I might order an egg sandwich to arrive with my Saratogian and Times Union in the morning.
There you go.
Alan, when you talked about national news versus the local news, I think on the local level, we need to do both, and that exposing the fascist tendencies and the risks that our democracy faces is something that faces local journalists, and there still are plenty of them around. Now that when we have the next round of elections coming up, do we ask the local politicians where they stand on those national issues? So we want to know where they stand on the road paving and the bringing smart internet service to your community or things like that. But do we also want to know, was the election a lie? Where do they stand? Because that bubbles from the bottom up.
Boy, that's a really good point. And, in editorial board meetings for years, when I sat on the Times Union editorial board, we had this goal of trying to find out what people thought about these broader issues, because these local officials tend to rise up. If you're an elected city court judge today, you could be on the Supreme Court tomorrow, and then you could be nominated for federal judgeship. So it's best to sort of... Well, I guess it's like the king who tries to off the crown prince or something like that. You can see this youngster is going to be rising, and so take care of him early. Shakespeare wrote about it. But these are some of the issues.
Some kind of English major?
Yeah, sorry about that. We have to bring some of that stuff in. Anyway, we've run out of time despite all of these interesting conversations.
How could that be?
It's been a very thoughtful, thought-provoking conversation. Alan Shartok, Barbara Lombardo, Judy Patrick, and I'm Rex Smith, with gratitude to our producer, David Gastina, for making us sound much better than we otherwise would, and gratitude to you for joining us this week once again on The Media Project.
Oh, newspapermen are such interesting people. It's wonderful to represent the globe.
The Media Project is a production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio. Alan Shartok is CEO of WAMC, Professor Emeritus at the State University of New York, commentator, columnist, and author. Rex Smith is the former editor of the Albany Times-Union. Judy Patrick is the Vice President for Editorial Development for the New York Press Association. And Barbara Lombardo is a journalism professor at the University at Albany and former executive editor of the Saratogian and the Troy Record. You can listen to or podcast The Media Project anytime at WAMC.org. Or just download the WAMC app for your iPhone or Android at the Play Store today. Thanks for listening.
What a headache, what a mess. Oh, publishers are such interesting people. Let's give 3 cheers for freedom of the press.